This is Gloria Scarsi, and she is about to win 100,000 euros. But for just half a second, she didn't. In 2024, Gates offered 100,000 euros to the first rider to win a World Cup on a belt drive bike. 3 years later, that money is still sitting there. Not because nobody tried, but because apparently a belt drive bike is not quite the shortcut everyone thought it was. But gearbox bikes are not a new invention. They just went quiet for a while. Since the mid-90s, the bike industry has been experimenting with alternative transmissions. GT built a complicated prototype that ran a chain on the left side of the frame, which sounds completely insane, but actually worked well enough that they eventually turned it into a production bike a decade later. Then, in 2004, Honda showed up to the World Cup with the RN01, a machine that looked more like a motorbike than a bicycle. Despite all odds, Greg Minnaar proceeded to win 6 World Cup races on it, and everyone assumed the bike contained some kind of exotic sequential gearbox. But when people eventually figured out what was actually inside, they found an enclosed derailleur system, basically a normal derailleur hidden inside a box to protect it from rocks and mud. The point is that the sport has always known the exposed derailleur is a weak point, fragile, heavy at the wrong end of the bike, constantly getting smashed by rocks, and engineers have been trying to solve that problem in different ways for 30 years. And the reason none of those early experiments stuck around is very simple. The traditional chain and derailleur are cheaper and lighter, so the industry moved on. And for most of the 2000s and 10s, gearbox bikes were basically a curiosity, not a threat. That started to quietly change around 2022, when pinion gearboxes and Gates belt systems had finally matured enough to be genuinely viable at World Cup level. But still, nobody wanted to run a belt drive, so Gates did the most obvious thing. They put 100,000 euros on the line. In 2024, a lot of people in the industry looked at that and thought it was basically free money, because many serious teams immediately committed to building their entire race programs around belt drive bikes. But in 2024, no rider on a belt drive took a World Cup win. Then, 2025 was a completely different story. The teams doubled down, and the newly born AON Racing was one of the teams that stood out the most. Because while most of the others were gravitating towards light carbon fiber frames, they went the complete opposite way.
Let's make the bike a lot stiffer. Let's go heavier because everything's going in that direction anyway. Give ourselves some options with suspension kinematics to sort of stiffen up the initial travel.
It should basically look like a trophy truck in the dunes, you know, when they hammer through the whoops and you just see the wheels going.
Reese Wilson, an elite downhill racer, world champion in 2020 and World Cup winner in 2021, founded the team for a simple reason.
I mean, the whole kind of reason I started this team was to have the ultimate freedom in so many different areas. Like, it's really nice to be able to just go on the internet, see if it's available, purchase it myself, and then just go out and try it, and not have to worry about having somebody, or even ask somebody, like, is it okay if I do this? If it is better, then we go, right, well, what's the next step? Then how do we either make our own?
But freedom itself doesn't win races, let alone the 100,000 euros on the line. The 2025 season started with real momentum. At a preseason European Cup in Fort William, Charlie Hatton and Hattie Harnden both won their categories on belt drive bikes, against fields that were stacked enough to basically qualify as a World Cup. And suddenly, everyone started talking about the possible massive payout. And then the World Cup season started. But the actual results told a slightly more complicated story. At Andorra, Loic Bruni won in 2 minutes 34 seconds, and Jackson Goldstone was second. The best belt drive result in the men's race was Tuhoto Ariki Pene in 8th place, 3.5 seconds back from the winner. At the World Championships in Champéry, Gloria Scarsi on the Z-Road finished 9th, almost 8 seconds behind Valley Hall, who won her 4th consecutive world title. Monika Hrasnik on the Gamooks prototype finished 12th. On the kind of track where you are braking hard constantly from top to bottom, the belt drive bikes were clearly struggling. But when everyone had lost hope, something happened. At Leogang in 2025, Ollie Clark won the Junior World Cup on a 0DG3 belt drive bike.
Is he going to get the bike to the line in time? Ollie Clark crosses the line and goes fastest. Clark wins in Leogang,
becoming the first person in history to win a World Cup on a belt-driven gearbox bike. But the 100,000 euros stayed in the bank because the prize only applies to the elite category. Despite not taking home the grand prize, he proved that winning on a belt drive bike was possible.
If you enjoy these videos, please hit the subscribe button. It will really mean the world to me.
The 2026 season opened in South Korea, and the belt drive teams came out of the gate looking faster than ever. In qualifying, the top 3 women's times were all set on belt drive bikes, which had never happened before at a World Cup. Then on race day, 4-time world champion Valley Hall came down on her chain-driven Commensal and set a time that looked unbeatable. But then the Italian Gloria Scarzi dropped. Riding the 0DG3, she entered the last sector just less than 0.3 seconds back.
So Gloria Scarzi on the move. Is she going to become the first Italian to take a victory since Eleonora Farina back in Ligier a couple of seasons ago?
Pressure was unreal.
Scarzi on track, just a couple of turns and a couple of drops to go for MS Racing. Are we going to see a belt drive bike go onto the hot seat half a second slower?
She was faster than Hall in the bottom half of the course. She matched her through the technical sections, and she still came up half a second short. So why is that half second still there after 3 years? Under lab conditions, a traditional chain is actually more efficient than a belt drive, but in a real downhill race where you are generating over 1,000 watts out of corners and the chain is constantly getting contaminated by mud and grit, that gap shrinks to almost nothing. The real problem is everything else. The gearbox adds weight. The suspension has to be completely redesigned around the fixed drive sprocket, and on steep tracks with heavy braking, as Champery proved, the rear suspension can actually work against the rider and demand a totally different technique. These gearbox bikes are so over-engineered they look like spaceships compared to traditional downhill bikes. Charlie Hatton and Atherton Racing spent the entire off-season figuring out where the time was going.
The bike looked quite soft, and personally looking at my ride, and I just looked very relaxed. I wasn't aggressive enough.
And we had it set up that you could get up to speed quickly, but then it was harder to push past that.
But here's the part nobody really talks about.
Advantage is that the belt drive stays over the complete lifetime at almost the same efficiency. Other drivetrains drop the efficiency over the lifespan.
Martin Abe, head of technical at Universal Transmissions, the company behind the Gates carbon drive system, admitted that the main argument for belt drives is that they maintain consistent efficiency over their entire lifespan. Which is true, but completely irrelevant here. World Cup teams swap components at basically every race, running a fresh chain at peak efficiency every single time. The durability advantage that makes belt drives great for trail riders simply does not exist at this level. These teams are chasing a prize on a technology whose biggest selling point does not even apply to their situation, and they are still just half a second away from claiming it. 2 full racing seasons in, the 100,000 euros is still sitting there. The question worth asking is whether Gates is genuinely pushing the sport forward or whether this is just a very expensive marketing campaign. Let me know what you think in the comments, and thanks for watching.